Sorry. Kurz, falscher Knopf gedrückt. Sowas, aber auch durch das Loch kommen wir glatt wieder hierher zurück. Sehr interessant. Jetzt wählen wir aber mal die rote Tür aus.
Good, good. Now, if you don't mind, there's something I'd like to show you. But to do that, I think it would be best for us to start from the beginning. This is a very sad story about the death of a man named Stanley.
Was?
Stanley worked for a company in a big building where he was employee number 427. His job pushing buttons demanded little of him, so there was not much of himself to give, and in this way Stanley's job felt less and less like his every day. But if buttons need pushing one day, it means they'll need pushing the next and then the next. So without question or judgment, Stanley continued to do what the screen told him. One keystroke flowed into another keystroke, flowed into his ride home, flowed into dinner, flowed into waking up, flowed into going to work, and here he was again. Stanley was typing out a complete sentence that said absolutely nothing at all. If in reality no one ever actually disappeared from the office, and Stanley never got the opportunity to make a decision, to choose which path he wanted to take, would his life still have any meaning? Perhaps when we long for something deeply enough, these hopes and fantasies become so strong in our minds that we truly believe that we're there, controlling that person and living that adventure. To manipulate your own thoughts and emotions might mean freedom from a self-imposed prison, but these delusions can be fatal to those who can't tell the difference. And so, Stanley asked, if that door never opened, if I'll never be able to walk away from those people and from these buttons, is this life still worth experiencing? Am I actually happy? Stanley answered this question by pushing a button. Then he pushed a button, and then he pushed a button. Then he pushed a button.
Please die.
Then he pushed a button.
Ja. Gut. Bleibt uns ja wohl nichts anderes übrig. Ich muss mir angewöhnen, alles zu sprechen. Ja,
Klick.
Danke. Okay.
Stanley decided to go to the staff lounge to check on his co-workers. He never functioned well by himself and constantly needed support and guidance from others, so the thought of total solitude was terrifying to him.
Ja, ja.
When Stanley came to a set of two open doors, he entered the door on his left.
Speichern. Nein, right. It's speichern.
This was not the correct way to the employee lounge, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction.
Nein, danke. Ich fahre jetzt mal
Stanley
mit dem
was
Licht
so
nach
bad
oben.
at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago. Maybe this is why everyone had left. No one wanted to be around someone as bad at listening as him. And since he was walking into the middle of nowhere, and thus ruining the entire story, Stanley decided that he would punish himself. So when he came to the elevator and the doors opened, he stepped inside and pushed the button to go up.
Ja. Ja, ich gehorche dir, Meister. Ja, natürlich will ich jetzt sehen, was passiert, wenn ich da drauf drücke. Na? Hast du mir nichts zu erzählen? Ich bin doch genau den Weg gegangen. Oh. Ah. Crazy Wand. Ah. Okay. Und wo sind wir hier jetzt? Bleibt mir wohl nichts anderes übrig, hä? Au!
It almost perplexed Stanley that he had actually gone and stepped into this metal trap. After all, it should have been no surprise that this thing would lead him to his death. But he thought to himself, this is simply the price to pay for ruining a perfectly good story. So he resigned and willingly accepted his fate, the inevitable end toward which he had spent so long stumbling. Farewell, Stanley.
Oh, Scheiße. Huh?
Farewell, Stanley, cried the narrator as he sent his subject down the conveyor belt and into the enormous metal jaws. In a single visceral instant, Stanley was obliterated as the machine crushed every bone in his body, killing him instantly.
Okay.
It's a shame, then, that for all his work, it was such a meaningless victory for the narrator. Did he really think he would accomplish anything by murdering this disposable vessel?
Was soll denn das? Oh mein Gott, das ist ja wie ein schlechter Traum. Okay. Okay. Wo, das ist ja wie ein Albtraum. Nochmal in so ein Ding rein?
Every possible choice Stanley could make had been designed for him long before he ever set foot here. The narrator wanted to kill him. Stanley was already dead from the moment he hit start.
Aha, toll. Ich bin schon gestorben, als ich Start gedrückt habe. Yay. Woohoo. Okay, ich dachte schon, das war jetzt nicht platt, aber Exit. Die Exit. Aha. Okay.
There's no salvation for either of these two, I'm afraid. The narrator had as little power over Stanley as Stanley did over the paths that he walked. But listen to me. This story is not over. You can still save these two. You can stop the program before they both fail. Push escape and press quit. There's no other way to beat this game. As long as you move forward, you'll be walking someone else's path. Stop now, and it'll be your only true choice. Whatever you do, choose...
Ich glaube, ich bin tot. Die Frage ist, kommt jetzt hier noch was? Oder muss ich selbst? Ich glaube, ich muss selbst. Ja. Aha. Interessant. Wir gehen jetzt trotzdem da, weil ich durch die andere Tür gehen will.
This was not the correct way to the employee lounge, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction. He was back on track.
Okay. Gehen wir von hier weiter.
As Stanley entered the lounge, he was horrified to find not a single person here. He decided he would walk up to see his boss, hoping that he would find an answer there.
Oh mein Gott, es ist keiner hier. Ich bin ja so überrascht und oh mein Gott, bin ich einsam. Das war überhaupt nicht gespielt. Ja, genau. Wir sind Arbeiter, drücken Knöpfe, leben in so einem Pausenraum, aber an der Wand hängen Baupläne für, ach, weiß Gott wie viel komplizierte Maschinen. Naja. Wir sind halt alle irgendwo Genies. Hallo, Kanada, hallo, Kanada. Naja, dann gehe ich wieder.
Coming to a staircase, Stanley walked upstairs to his boss's office.
Stanley walks downstairs.
But Stanley just couldn't do it. He considered the possibility of facing his boss, of admitting that he had left his post during work hours. He might be fired for that. And in such a competitive economy, was it really worth taking that risk? All because he believed everyone had disappeared? His boss would think he was crazy. And then something occurred to Stanley. Maybe, he thought to himself, maybe I am crazy. Everyone I know simply vanishing out of the blue, there's almost no other explanation for it. And a nagging fear began to creep up in his mind. Questions that had been there all along. He just hadn't put his finger on them yet. For example, why couldn't he see his feet when he looked down? Why did doors close automatically behind him wherever he went? And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Was he just walking around in circles? Where am I, he thought. And the more he found himself unable to answer these questions, the more questions continued to arise, until he came to the issue that had been slowly boiling until he could ignore it no longer. Why is there a voice in my head, dictating everything that I'm doing and thinking? Suddenly, every door slammed shut. "No!" Stanley screamed. "I need to get out of here. I need to know that there's something out there. I need to know it's not just all in my head." And he screamed and clutched at his skull as the voice grew harsher and the music in the background rose higher and higher. And then, moments before collapsing to the ground, Stanley clenched his fists and screamed to anyone who might be listening, "I'm not real! I'm not real! Don't believe any of it! None of it's real!" And then everything went black.
Yeah.
This is the story of a woman named Mariella. Mariella woke up on a day like any other.
Okay.
She got dressed, went to work, clocked in, clocked out, and then she walked home. But her walk on this day was interrupted by the body of a man who had stumbled through town talking and screaming to himself, and then collapsed dead on the sidewalk. Moments after seeing him, she would turn, run to the nearest police station, and call for an ambulance. But for just a few brief seconds, she merely stood there, unable to move. The tragedy was not the death of a single person. It was that she would never know this man's story, never hear in his own words what had happened to him, or what he believed had happened to him. For to know these things would be to exist inside the head of the man himself. So all she could do was observe from a distance and pity him. But Mariella had places to be and people to meet with, very important people, whose impressions of her would affect her career and indeed the rest of her life. She stood there for only a moment, looking down at the body, and then she ran.
Oh mein Gott, ist das Spiel gut! Crazy, aber gut. Also mir gefällt das. Jetzt gehen wir mal die Stiegen hinauf. Da ging es normalerweise wahrscheinlich noch eins höher. Da ist einfach abgeschnitten worden. Naja. Yay.
Entering his manager's office, Stanley was once again stunned to discover not an indication of any human life. It was at this point that he began to feel dizzy and a little sick, and even thought he might pass out when suddenly he noticed a keypad next to the filing cabinet in the corner of his boss's office. Stanley had never seen this panel before and had no idea what combination of numbers would produce any result. In fact, only